Hello everybody, this is Editing Sarah. Sorry for the frizzy hair. I really quickly want to state before we get into this video, trigger warning for mass murder, mentions of suicide, mentions of drug use, basically everything bad that could possibly happen is in this video. So I wanted to give a trigger warning before. I do use audio from the death tape, and I do use video footage of Jim Jones in this video. I'm hoping not to get copyrighted for it. So yeah, trigger warning, thought I would do it before the video even started, so I hope you guys enjoy the video, and leave a comment and like and share, whatever. Bye.
I've loved you. How very much I've tried my best to give you the good life.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I kind of want to get right into today's video. I do want to state really quick that if you see me taking frequent drinks of my tea, it is because my throat is killing me. I don't know what happened. It was fine yesterday, and now today it just hurts. So yeah. November 18th, 1978, more than 900 members of the American cult called the People's Temple died in a mass suicide under the direction of their cult leader, Jim Jones. So we know of Jim Jones, we know of the People's Temple. There's been a lot of movies about it, there's been a lot of TV shows about it. One of my favorite TV shows touched on the topic in their 7th season, which was American Horror Story, and that was the season of Cult. So it is infamous. Like, everyone knows of Jim Jones and his cult. Well, Jim Jones and the People's Temple wasn't always a cult. In the early to mid 1950s, Jim Jones actually founded the People's Temple. Later in the 60s, he would move his People's Temple to California, and in the 70s, he would move his people to Guyana. So, Jim Jones was born on May 13th, 1931 in rural Indiana. I remember the first time I ever heard this case. As a resident of Indiana, currently born and raised, I was so shocked. And not only was I shocked about that, I was shocked about the fact that he was a Pentecostal preacher, because my brother is a Pentecostal preacher. In the early 1950s, he began working as a self-ordained Christian minister in small churches around Indianapolis. But in order to raise money to start his own church, he tried numerous different ventures, and he even went door to door selling live monkeys, like monkeys that were alive and like could kind of make their noise. So, like I said earlier, around the mid 1950s, he opened the People's Temple Church. So it was located in Indianapolis, and what was really shocking about this church was that it was a racially integrated church. It wasn't segregated, it wasn't for whites, it wasn't for blacks. He didn't really care, and this was very unusual for a Midwestern church in the 1950s. He actually helped desegregate Indiana and earned a devout following among civil rights activists. Like, that kind of brought people in and be like, oh, he doesn't really care about that whole thing and all that. So, during the 1960s, he moved his church from Indianapolis to California, like I said earlier. He and his church continued to promote the message of compassion, and this really pulled people in, especially people who were marginalized and excluded from society. Kind of, in a sense, the freaks of society. But what people didn't see inside the church on the outside was that they actually embraced socialism a lot and hoped that eventually the country would turn to socialism. Around the time that they're starting to really embrace socialism, Jim also discovered faith healing. Faith healing is basically where the preacher goes praying and then goes, oh my gosh, you're healed. Personally, I have seen this with quite a few people, and I don't think it works. That is my belief. You can believe whatever you want. If you believe it works, that is totally up to you. I personally have seen it. I personally don't feel like it works. But when he discovered faith healing and like he started to kind of practice it in the church, this like would draw more people, and more people would be like, oh, did you hear about Jim Jones's church? He like can like touch your forehead and all of a sudden you're healed. And that bringing more people in for him also brought in more money because you put tithes in and stuff like that. So he would promise these people that he was healing, that there would be miracles, that he could pull the cancer out of them. When in reality, he couldn't pull the cancer out of them, and it was actually just rotten chicken that he would produce like a magician. Like he would just like pull it from behind your ear and be like, oh, there's the cancer, and like throw it. Like it was really stupid. There's actual, like I've seen a video of him doing it. Maybe I'll put it in.
Ingram, you're concerned about the losing of your sight. You're not able to see me clearly.
That's true.
You've told me nothing about your condition. Take your glasses off. Just dare in our faith. I'm going to hold up some fingers. You concentrate hard.
3.
So it was for a good cause, is what he and his team at the church would say about this. But this was the first step down a long and dark road, like that ended in a very tragic way. It wasn't long before things became very strange for the People's Temple. Jim ended up becoming increasingly paranoid about the world around him. Like, he thought the world was out to get him. He thought that Mother Earth was going to turn itself around and like come and get him. His speeches in church, his sermons, actually turned into calling an upcoming doomsday, saying that doomsday was coming, and that doomsday was the result of a nuclear apocalypse brought about by the government mismanagement. At the time that Jim was like kind of going crazy and like saying the world's coming to an end, he was still friends with like high up there politicians, including First Lady Rosalind Carter and the California Governor Jerry Brown. But slowly the media that Jim had been getting, you know, positive media attention of this amazing church and what they do, the media started to turn on him, and several high profile members of the People's Temple actually defected from the People's Temple. Ironic enough, there was conflict between the people who had defected from the cult, People's Temple, and the People's Temple. The People's Temple, you know, talked about how, you know, they were traitors and they didn't know what they were saying. They were just saying what they were saying about the church to slander the church, when the people who had defected were saying what it was like in the church, saying that it was very cultish. It was just kind of like they were slandering each other in the media, and it was kind of stupid. It was like very stupid, actually. So at this time, the church is kind of getting a little bit more odd and a little wonky, because the structure of the church was very odd. But keep in mind, this is the 1960s. He's a very integrated, like, church. Like, it's not segregated. It's not for whites. It's not for blacks. Like they kind of were mingled together. A group of well-off white women oversaw the running of the temple. Like, it wasn't Jim Jones. It was a group of well-off white women. And keep in mind, the congregation of People's Temple is still largely black. Like, that's a big number of, you know, black people still going to Jim Jones's church. And the meetings for the higher-ups in the church began to get much more secretive, as they planned a numerous different complicated fundraising schemes. These schemes included a combination of staged healings, the faith healings I was just talking about, trinket marketing, and solicitous mailing. They were coming up with so many ways to make money, whether it be illegal or not. They were finding different ways. And at this time, you know, as you can tell, the church really isn't in the religious aspects of the church. And Jim really wasn't interested in this religious aspect anymore. He was more interested in the social progress he could achieve with a devoted following. Like, it was very, like, devoted following. Like, it was terrifying. And his social goals became more radical over time, and he began to attract the interest of Marxist leaders as well as violent leftist groups. This shift in the church really brought media coverage down on the People's Temple, and it was now widely becoming known as a cult. Like, in the media is now portraying it as a cult, and Jim Jones is not having it. He is like, this is stupid. No. And this causes him to basically go on the run. So he sends a group of his People's Temple people down to Guyana to look for land. Guyana goes, cool, you can have some land. He got quite a lot of land. And in 1977, Jim Jones moved himself, his family, and all of the People's Temple down to Guyana, where they lived in a compound. This would allow Jim to basically run it as a socialist government. Like, he wanted to do that because Guyana was a socialist government and had a non-extradition status with the United States. But, like I said, they were living in this compound. These people genuinely thought, like, of People's Temple, that there was going to be homes for them when they showed up. Like, it was all going to be built. Like, it just sounded so perfect. No, when they got there, they had to build it. They built it as they lived there. And their days on the compound, and building it were 10-hour work days. Like, time you woke up, basically, to the time dinner started. And your evenings were filled with lectures as Jim spoke of his fears for society and everything wrong with the world. And, this next part might sound fun, but once you hear the context behind it, it's not. The compound would have movie nights. They had movie nights in Jonestown, where the entertaining movies that you were seeing in the United States in the 1960s and 70s were replaced with Soviet-style documentaries about the dangers of the outside world. Basically, he was showing his people movies about what was wrong with the outside world while being a part of what is wrong with the outside world. So, the rations, like, their food was very limited. The compound had been built on poor soil. And they basically had everything imported via negotiations on shortwave radios, which happened to be the only way the People's Temple could communicate with the outside world. What's even better is if you think the 10-hour work days or the food being rationed was bad, imagine the punishment if you did one thing wrong or you did something that Jim Jones thought was wrong. So rumors began to leak into Guyana, like the Guyana government, that cult members were harshly disciplined, beaten, and locked in coffin-sized prisons, or left to spend the night alone in dry wells. And at this point in time, Jim Jones is losing his absolute fucking mind. Like, he is absolutely not there in the head. His health is deteriorating. And by a way of treatment, he thought, oh, you know what? I think I should take a nearly lethal combination of amphetamine and pentobarbital. Why he thought that was such a good idea is beyond me. And ironic enough, a survivor of the massacre stated that he would tell us that in the United States, African Americans were being herded into concentration camps, that there was genocide on the streets, they were coming to kill and torture us because we'd chosen what he called the socialist track. He said they were on their way. And in order to prepare for when the United States government showed up at Jonestown, Jim had began to rise the idea of a revolutionary suicide, which was what he called a last resort, and that his congregation would pursue if the enemy showed up on their doorstep, basically. Eventually, a group of people who had left the People's Temple, who were family members of people who were still in People's Temple, actually began to get very worried, and they told a U.S. representative from California, Leo Ryan, basically begging him to go down there. So he decided, why not? I'll go down to Guyana and see what's going on. Like, nothing really seems odd from, like, up here, right? Though the media coverage in the United States was like, what happened to Jim Jones' cult? So he took, like, a group of people with him. And he arrived in Guyana in November of 1978 with a delegation that included news reporters and photographers, along with concerned relatives of some of the People's Temple members. On November 17th, the congressmen and the reporters were welcomed into the Jonestown compound, and to their surprise, they were, welcomed with a dinner and an evening of entertainment. Jim even agreed to meet with the reporters, and tell what was going on. However, during the visit, some People's Temple members, the members of the cult, asked Congressman Leo Ryan to help them get out of Jonestown. Ironic enough, Leo actually mentioned this to Jim, and he was like, oh, they don't know what they're saying. But on November 18th, Ryan and his group that had arrived in Guyana the day before now included a small amount of people who had defected from People's Temple and were going back home. They were at a nearby airstrip in the jungle, and they were ambushed by, yes, you guessed it, gunmen sent by Jim Jones. Congressman Leo Ryan was killed, along with a reporter and a cameraman from NBC, photographer from the San Francisco Examiner, and a female People's Temple member who was attempting to leave. So Jim Jones had sent these people to go kill this group that was leaving, and he actually waited for them to come back, tell them, hey, they're dead, so that he could put his revolutionary suicide into play. So the guys came back, they're like, hey man, we killed them, they're gone, they're dead, what do we do? Jim Jones told his followers that now that they had killed those people, soldiers would come for them and torture them. He ordered everyone to gather in the main pavilion and commit what he termed a revolutionary act. So the youngest members of the People's Temple were to die first. These were children, 3 years, I can't even remember what the youngest is, but the youngest was little. These were little babies. As an aunt, I have a niece who is a year old, and I have a cousin who is a year old, I couldn't imagine being put in a position watching them have to be killed. Parents and nurses actually were the ones that killed the youngest members of the People's Temple. They used a syringe to drop a potent mix of cyanide, sedatives, and a powdered fruit juice into the children's throat. This is disgusting. Because imagine, they've done this hundreds of times. They think it's a fake suicide. He had trained them. They had done numerous mock suicides. So I don't think they thought this was real. But imagine having to watch your child die, thinking it's fake, and then all of a sudden they start convulsing and they start foaming at the mouth. This freaked the people out. And then adults had to be lined up to drink the poison-laced concoction while armed guards surrounded them. If you ever heard of the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid or don't drink the Kool-Aid, this is the event that is the source of that phrase. Don't drink the Kool-Aid came from Jim Jones. This whole thing. So 900 and some people took this concoction. And if you tried to run, the armed guards would shoot you. There were some survivors who managed to run to the woods fast enough and didn't get shot, and they just kept running until somebody found them. But ironic enough, Guyana's officials were going to show up the next day and basically kind of order Jim Jones to either, leave or they were going to fight it out with him, right? They show up the next day and it is eerily quiet. It is all sorts of freaky as hell. They're this is very quiet, this is odd. Jim Jones should be making some kind of noise. It's far enough into the day they should be out on the field. They found this very odd. And they even, like, their statement was like it was foggy, so they couldn't really see the ground. And then they started tripping over things. And so they naturally looked down thinking it was logs that the Jonestown people had put there as a way of kind of like distracting the soldiers. And when they looked down, they found hundreds of bodies of elderly people, middle-aged people, young adults, teenagers, children, infants on the ground dead. People perished with their arms around their family members. In the pictures of Jonestown, there are literally, in the pictures of the aftermath of Jonestown, there were families holding each other as they literally died, like they held each other. They searched for Jim Jones, expecting to find him either alive or dead. They didn't know how dead or how he would have died, but they eventually found Jim Jones. He was found in a chair, dead from a single bullet wound to the head. They believe it was self-inflicted. He died at the age of 47, and I find it very odd that he put over 900 people through the most awful way of death, and he went out in such a quick way. Like, he was, in a sense, a wimp, because he saw everyone die in front of him and waited until they were all dead before he shot himself in the head. Like, that is so terrible. The death toll at Jonestown on November 18th of 1978 was 909 people. A third of them were children. Like I said, a few people managed to escape into the jungle that day, while at least several dozen more People's Temple members, including several of Jim's sons, were in another part of Guyana at the time. So in total, 909 people died, and only 33 people survived. So, there is a recording of the night that Jim Jones took the People's Temple's lives. It is known as the death tape. And this really helped investigators understand what happened that night. And researchers have also found over 1,000 recordings of propaganda, conversations, and sermons that painted a gruesome picture of what really happened in the People's Temple. Ironic enough, this wasn't the website I used, it was just the website that was closest to what I had used originally. The website I originally used detailed a woman's, it detailed something from the death tape. It was a woman going, why are we taking this way out? She was asking, why were they taking the Kool-Aid way out? Why didn't they fight if soldiers were going to come for them, right? Like, the children shouldn't have to die. Like, we shouldn't have to die. Like, we should fight. Like, that's how it should go. And everyone else in the People's Temple were, like, yelling at her, going, no, we have to go out this way. He said so, blah, 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 blah. Or you're just afraid to die. And she had to backtrack and be like, I'm not afraid to die. It's just I don't want to go out this way. She wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about the children. Those children didn't deserve to die that way. In total, I don't think those 909 people deserve to die. If that 909 people includes Jim Jones, then those 908 people didn't deserve to die. There's only one person who genuinely deserved to die that day, in my opinion, and that is Jim Jones. He was clearly out of his mind. Nobody wanted to realize it. Nobody wanted to put forth and go, hey man, you're out of your ever-living mind. We need to get him out of here. Nobody wanted to stand up to Jim Jones and say that because they were so scared of what he'd have those armed guards do to them. They were so scared they were never going to make it out of Guyana, and they didn't make it out of Guyana. And if they did, it was in a body bag. Jim Jones is, personally to me, one of the worst cult leaders because he brainwashed people for so long. There were people who were still with him in 1978 who were there when People's Temple was founded. He'd brainwashed them from the beginning, and he brainwashed them into death. That is a 20-year time span where he literally just brainwashed people. Like, it is so incredibly shocking to me to know that people do that stuff. There's a gnat. That people are so sick and twisted they can do that to somebody. So if you guys see the signs in somebody that they're a little cuckoo and it's like a church leader, you should probably get the F out of there. Like, but yeah, that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, guys, if you go to my channel and you go to the banner, there is a little Google form that you can fill out that allows me to see what cases you guys want to do. Basically all I have to do is type in the case, basically whatever you want me to cover, and a little bit about it, and then I'll research it. Thank you guys for doing that, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.